to the Web3 Prof Podcast.
All right, good morning and good afternoon, everyone. I'm here with Scott Dedels, who is the CEO of BlockRewards. Scott, thanks for being with me here today.
Thanks for having me on.
So, Scott, I'd just like to get things started off first by hearing your story. How did you get into crypto? Tell me the story.
I have spent most of my career working in benefits and pensions. And I got into all of this back in 2020. During lockdown, everyone had a lot of free time. And I sort of spent the first, 2 weeks of lockdown watching Netflix like everybody. And then I wanted to make better use of my time. I was managing a bunch of pensions, and pensions have a heavy exposure to bonds. And when the government started to announce a series of different financial interventions that were part of the overall pandemic strategy to keep the economy going, it was obvious there was just an unprecedented amount of money printing that was about to happen. So I was early on the inflation train. Didn't really understand inflation nearly to the degree that I do now. And I started reading economics textbooks, economic theory, and found a Bitcoin book by accident. And so I was really just trying to understand the effects of all this money printing on the bond market for the pensions that I was worried about. And I just completely fell into Bitcoin. And from there...
Do you remember the book?
Yeah, it was The Price of Tomorrow by Jeff Booth.
Of course.
Yeah. Yeah, that book really... I want to say astounded me. I was, up until that point, Bitcoin, even 4 years ago, was a household word. So I had known about it, and everyone has, at this point in their lives, probably had some kind of a run-in or a brush with the topic. So I never looked closely at it. I read the book, and I was just like, yeah, it was so much more substantial, the conversation, than what my limited impression as an outsider was. So then I got really interested, and I started studying a lot. And I spent that time, I would say 2020, 2021, really like immersed in crypto. And with my background in traditional finance, I think I did what a lot of people tend to do and assume a traditional investing strategy makes sense in the crypto space. So I was thinking about balanced portfolio and how, everyone should have some Bitcoin, but they should have some speculative exposure to everything else and kind of build a portfolio. These are ideas that just seem logically to port over. So I sort of spent that year owning different, cryptocurrencies and trading them. And I had a really big exposure to Luna. I was a big believer in Luna. And so when that nuked and went to zero, that really pivoted my journey around, why did that happen? What are the fundamental economic principles that make money work? Forget about cryptocurrency or regular currency. And since that time, since the Luna crash, I've really been Bitcoin only and focusing all of my time and effort on helping people understand why Bitcoin only.
One of the best investments I ever made was, for fun, I bought Luna. I put $1 into Luna after it crashed. And I thought this would be like a good souvenir to remind myself to never buy stuff like this. So I bought $1 worth. And I have never timed the market so perfectly because it pumped 500x within a couple hours. And I made $500. Cool. And I sold it. And so it's no longer a souvenir. I thought this should also still be a reminder. Never get into this kind of nonsense.
Yeah, totally.
Okay, that's great. So now you're Bitcoin only, and you're the CEO of BlockRewards. So tell us, what is the relationship between Bitcoin and employee benefits and compensation, and what is BlockRewards?
Yeah, so as I understood it better, as I understood Bitcoin, coming up from this lens of pensions, my initial thought was, okay, so this thing has some role to play as sort of insurance on the bond market. So it's obvious to me that pensions will need to understand Bitcoin. We've had ETFs in Canada for a while, but the lack of Bitcoin ETFs in the US has kind of stunted the pension exposure to Bitcoin. And Canadian pensions, the US pensions would probably be first to do that stuff. So the big Canadian pensions did try some crypto investments that blew up. So, there was BlockFi and Celsius. I think it was Ontario Teachers Pension. And but there hasn't been a sort of a marquee Canadian pension to announce that they're just buying Bitcoin or Bitcoin ETF. So initially I thought it was to do with that. And then, as my understanding of all this stuff has continued to evolve, it just makes more sense that Bitcoin is it's a financial instrument that hasn't existed before. So when you think about how it might fit into systems that are legacy systems, it's not going to have a perfect, neat fit into any one thing of how we used to do things. It is a way to save your financial energy. But it's something that it just makes sense to try and earn Bitcoin because our time is finite. We have only so much time in the day that we want to work, and we have only so much time in our lives that we want to work. And we're all trading our finite time for money that is not finite. And so it's a sort of an asymmetrical exchange of value if you just think about the intrinsic nature of what we're doing. And as government issued money accelerates in its depreciation, that trade becomes worse and worse for everyone. So today, it's a very niche thing to think about earning Bitcoin instead of earning the trusted money that gets issued from the government. But getting back to, principles of monetary networks, the most important thing people really need money to be able to do is retain its value. And especially if you're thinking about the money that you're earning by trading your hard-earned time for. So to me, it makes sense that what we will witness over the next however long is just sort of a mainstreamization of the normalization of the idea of earning some Bitcoin or as much Bitcoin as you're comfortable with, because it's the only money that can't be diluted or debased.
So do you think that there's a realistic opportunity for employees to ask their companies to pay them in Bitcoin? And is this happening now?
There absolutely is a realistic opportunity. It is happening. I think that, this is part of what we're doing. We're just trying to create systems that make it as simple as possible for employers to wade into offering this in whatever level they're comfortable. And, I would say today it's very accessible for companies that want to offer it, and it can be voluntary or optional. So, this is something that if a company had 20 employees and they had 5 people that were interested in doing it, like there aren't any rules around this. So, we're welcoming of anyone.
So there's no legislation for or against this.
Mm-hmm.
You can do whatever you want.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. You could pay your employees in anything. I think like anything that they're willing to be paid in.
Right.
So what technically happens is you're still earning Canadian dollars, and then at the point of payroll, those Canadian dollars purchase Bitcoin, and the employee then receives a Bitcoin. And you could do it with other currencies too. In my opinion, Bitcoin would be the only non-governmental currency that an employer would want to get involved with. If people want to speculate and buy other things with their money, that's fine. But I think coming through a company, it's just a different level of consideration. So
I've heard of maybe some athletes asking to be paid in Bitcoin, but I've not ever heard of an actual company, maybe a regular company that regular human beings might work for. So is this currently happening in Canada where people are getting paid in Bitcoin part of their salary?
Absolutely. Yeah. We have lots of companies working with us today, and we're not the only provider of this service in Canada. So it's a small market, but again, I think the use case is everyone who's working in Canada. Canada is such a great example. There's 18 million people working in Canada. All 18 million of them in some way are feeling the crunch of diminishing purchasing power.
Yeah.
So, there's a big opportunity.
What happens with the tax aspect of this? Am I still, if I get paid 100% in Bitcoin by the company, by my employer, I guess they're deducting all of the tax deductions and CPP and EI and all that prior to the conversion into Bitcoin. Is that how it works?
Yeah, that's correct. So there aren't any tax implications at the time. For people who... There are people who are 100% living on Bitcoin in Canada, and I've had a few of them on my podcast. And it's a complicated thing to endeavor into. Whereas with a payroll purchase, with whatever amount you're comfortable with, it's also just a simple way to start accumulating.
Yeah.
And if for most people, and this is true of group RSPs or other savings vehicles, when something comes directly off your paycheck, it's just easier. And whether there's, people have to sort of trust themselves to be diligent about it. And, yeah. So this is partly why those work.
So if I get paid in Bitcoin and then I sell some Bitcoin, how am I taxed? Because that selling of the Bitcoin, from what I understand, is then a taxable event.
Mm-hmm, that's right. And I shouldn't, maybe with any of these things, I'm not an accountant and none of this is tax or financial advice. But yes, so it's, when you dispose of your Bitcoin, if it's higher in price than when you bought it, then the difference between what you bought it for and what you sold it for, that is a taxable capital gain.
So then on my pay stub, does it tell me, does it give me a record somehow through Block Rewards to know the price in which I kind of like bought Bitcoin at, or which I was paid in Bitcoin?
We don't do that. The way someone would do that, so for people who are, I would say most people who are using the product are not selling their Bitcoin. They're just using it to buy.
Yeah.
And for people who are doing a lot of buying and selling, they're probably just tracking. There are services like Coinly where you can get it tracks the address.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they do that.
Okay. So I would just input my wallet into one of these crypto tax software programs.
Yeah.
One of the products that you talk about on your website kind of talks about DCAing into crypto. Can you explain what that means and why that might be a good idea?
Yeah, for sure. DCA refers to dollar cost averaging, which is a financial term that kind of refers to buying anything. So when you're dollar cost averaging, you're buying something at a regular interval that changes in price all the time. So one day Bitcoin's X price, you buy some, the next day it's higher, it's lower. And in the dollar cost averaging theory is one way to get exposure to an asset that removes the pressure to buy the best possible price, because you're always going to get a different price. And so dollar cost average purchasers over time will get just a certain average price, as opposed to the lump sum people who just YOLO in and buy, and then they have to live with, when it's cheaper the next day, they're going to feel like they messed up.
Yeah, I mean, there is, it's hard to catch a falling knife sometimes, and to time your buy is, I've found, very, very difficult. In buying Bitcoin since 2017, there are a few occasions where I've got it right. So I eventually just adopted this strategy of just buying every once in a while, or semi-regularly, or something like that. Or when the market's generally down, I would kind of every couple of weeks buy more. I mean, that has been absolutely the best strategy I've had in acquiring Bitcoin. But it is like what you say, like it removes the pressure. Owning crypto can be a bit of an emotional roller coaster because Bitcoin certainly is volatile. And so some days you feel good and some days you feel bad. But if you're DCAing in, it doesn't feel so complicated and emotional.
I think part of the psychology of it is the nature of crypto trading 24/7 and creates just sort of a heightened awareness of the volatility. Like I'm not sure how volatile it is compared to other things, because we actually can't measure everything to the degree of real time that we can with Bitcoin. So, I think as an example, nobody checks the price of their house 6 times a day because they wouldn't be able to get an accurate measurement of it, right?
Right.
But if they could, owning a home would probably be incredibly stressful. Like if you were constantly refreshing your app and seeing your house price fluctuate up and down as your main asset, nobody would be able to have the stomach owning a house.
I've never thought about that before. Yeah, I mean, I don't know how much my car is worth today or tomorrow, or my house, or I've actually never considered that, because you do think about, I guess you can check your stock portfolio during the trading hours to see it fluctuate, but at nighttime you can go to sleep and know that it's not changing during that time. But I definitely am guilty of, if I wake up in the middle of the night, I certainly reach for my phone and check. It's a terrible habit, eh?
Yeah, delete those apps. That's my life hack, my number one life hack, man. I stopped doing that stuff. And, I think there's a couple reasons why it makes sense. Part of the fear for people, depending on your level of understanding of what's going on with Bitcoin, specifically, there's a fear that it might not be an enduring technology. So if it's only 15 years old, maybe you want to check it all the time, because in case it ceases to exist, you might want to be able to get in and get out.
Right.
But if you're wrong about that, and it turns out to be a permanent technology, like the internet is a very high likelihood of being a permanent technology.
Yeah.
And so where you're, kind of the initial internet is like 1969, maybe 1989 when people started to use it. Like we're 50 years into the internet, something like that.
Yeah.
I mean, when we're 50 years into Bitcoin, things will be very different.
Right. Absolutely.
So even in that, it's like this past maybe week has been kind of a negative price down, and everyone's like, oh, what's happening with Bitcoin? It's not, and we're talking about something that could potentially be a permanent and enduring technology, and we're worried about its movements in an extremely short time span. It's it's like worrying about what the weather is going to be in 3 days. Like,
right. Yeah. What other products do you offer at Block Rewards?
So basically, the service today is it's sort of a split stream where it's either the basic payroll, enabling employees to take some of their salaries in Bitcoin, or we help employers build it into a benefit. So if a company today wants to offer a savings plan, for an example, it's normal that as part of the compensation package, there might be an employer match. So this concept, I think, is really interesting for thinking about Bitcoin. Bitcoin today can't be registered inside a TFSA, but it has other benefits. So you don't get an RSP tax refund if you're participating in the Bitcoin program, but you get the benefit of actually owning Bitcoin, which has other benefits, which are, depending on how excited you are about those things, potentially very valuable. So we help employers structure a Bitcoin savings plan around this premise. So it could be, for every dollar you put in, we'll match it with another dollar up to a certain amount. Then it becomes an incentive, and something that an employer can sort of hold out there as something that they're doing to be different and, attract and retain their staff. I think that Bitcoin, one of the things we say is that Bitcoin is the apex incentive. Like if you think about, if it's true that Bitcoin is the best form of money that's ever existed, then as an employer, it makes sense that it would be the coolest thing you could offer your staff. So it's understanding it well enough to convey that value proposition, which is partly where we help as well. So we offer a lot of educational support, which is another service, helping employers navigate this, and then also helping their employees figure out how to participate. And we have a few other products in the pipeline that are going to be really exciting, actually using the Bitcoin technology and how it works differently to reimagine how companies could actually pay their staff. So in the fiat money world, whether you get paid hourly or a salary, like how your wage is calculated, you're probably getting paid every 2 weeks or on the 1st and 15th, or, that's how it works. And it works that way because of the rails of how we move money in the fiat world. And Bitcoin is something that is obviously accessible, and its peer-to-peer nature means that it would be then possible instead to do things just completely differently. So if a company wanted to pay somebody multiple times in a day, in a single day, that's possible. Now what needs to happen is, tools around why would you do that and how would you do that? And so we're going to go places with this thing over time of like, it's not just about earning Bitcoin, but it's about earning Bitcoin in a way that is now possible and native to Bitcoin.
I think that's really interesting and compelling. Also, the idea that as a company owner, when you submit payroll, you're submitting payroll, and that payroll is being deducted from your bank account long before your employees receive it. And so you have to have this cash balance on hand for a couple of weeks that just kind of goes into the ether before your employees actually get that. And so this idea around paying employees quicker also allows, I would imagine, the employer to keep the cash on their balance sheet for a longer period of time, thus requiring them to hold so much more cash in order to get through to payroll period. Am I right about that?
Yeah. There are a lot of really cool offshoots, I think, about starting to incorporate Bitcoin culture into your corporate culture. So this idea of proof of work. Bitcoin is money that is earned. Like the miners, they execute and expend energy to receive Bitcoin. And so the sort of Bitcoin ethos is intrinsically tied to doing the work. And to understand Bitcoin, you need to do work. It takes effort. Like you have to study so it's building a sort of culture of accountability and personal responsibility. Like if you're custodying your own Bitcoin, you're going to need to figure out how to do that yourself. And those are just good traits. Like if you're trying to run a successful business, I would imagine most successful businesses would value employees that care about accountability and personal responsibility. And so I think that the Bitcoin is sort of a viral mind idea that starts to change the way people think about everything. And it changes the way people think about money. Like we're frivolous with our money in some level because we understand that it's going to be worth less tomorrow than it is worth today. And that's why this concept of when people talk about blowing their money, it's like conjures an image of you have dust in your hand and you blow it out and scatter it into the wind. It's like, why would anyone do that with something that's valuable? They wouldn't. And so if you're going to work and trading your finite time for something that is of real value, you're probably going to approach your work in a different way. You know that you're receiving something that is much more valuable than money. And I would think that will, over time, as people understand this on a broader basis, change the way that they show up to work, and it will change the way that they think about their employer. And so it actually has the potential to reimagine the relationship between an employee and an employer.
Has there been a certain type of company that you've seen be interested in this? Are tech companies want this? Are plumbing companies into this? Or is it just really kind of Bitcoin maxis who happen to own companies that are trying to find ways to do this?
Yeah, for the most part, having an internal champion has been the thing we've noticed the most. So that could be the owner or somebody in HR or finance. I would say zooming out a little bit, there are some the trades for sure. Trucking, I think the truckers in general have some respect or relationship for Bitcoin after the convoy, and tech. Yep, there's an obvious younger employees or gig employees would understand Bitcoin and prioritize it.
Yeah, I can think of a few people that I know that are kind of, they're into crypto in some way, and they might be into altcoins, but they obviously ultimately respect Bitcoin. And probably it's hard. Employee retention is an interesting selling feature because it's hard to keep your employees. It's hard to find good employees, and having kind of any edge, even if it might come across a bit gimmicky initially, I think is a really cool, interesting way to engage with your employees. Do you guys have feedback from employees where they're like, oh yeah, this was like a reason why I stuck around, or this is an important part of my relationship with my employer?
So I would say what we do get is we can see, because of most of the companies offering our services offered on a voluntary basis now.
Yeah.
And so what we do notice is, as a percentage of the total staff, we grow. So more people do it, not less.
Yeah.
And more people tend to up their contributions than even keep them the same.
Interesting.
Yeah. So that's very observable.
So is there an opportunity, because you were talking about pension funds at the beginning and Bitcoin ETF, is there an opportunity to be involved in that type of investing, or is it only to be paid in Bitcoin at this point, or the matching of Bitcoin from the employer?
Mm-hmm. For right now, it's just being paid and doing matching programs. The pension thing, I think, will happen on its own. Fidelity's Canadian operations, often in pensions, what you have are predetermined portfolio allocations. So rather than picking, there's sort of two streams that happen with pension plan members. One would be people choosing individual funds, like, oh, I want the Asia Growth Fund, 10%. Or what most people actually tend to do is they have the choice between the conservative or the growth portfolio. And Fidelity Canada has started including the Bitcoin ETFs in their premix portfolios. So I think that we'll start to see that a lot, and it's a performance-driven market. So the Bitcoin ETFs continue to be the best performing ETFs, which they have been.
Are you talking about the Canadian ETFs or the American ETFs?
All of them.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, really? So even the Canadian ETFs that have been around for like 4 years now or whatever, they've been performing really well over that time period.
Yeah, for sure. And it's just on different time scales.
Sure.
So like if you, and these things can obviously change day to day. So if you happen to start buying at the top,
Yeah.
in 21, and you've been buying ever since, and now today we're underneath that number, so you'd be down. But that's very few people, because you would have had to actually have been the worst. And I was watching this. MicroStrategies did a big presentation yesterday because they're doing sort of their big annual Bitcoin software development conference. And there was a great slide talking about the average returns over time of the worst possible trading scenario. So looking at all the different people who could have bought the absolute top and sold the absolute bottom. And over a long enough time frame, even those people have outperformed everything else.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Yeah. So the worst possible trade I think you could have done, say over a 7-year period in Bitcoin, you would still have doubled your money.
Yeah.
Which, is still pretty good.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So how technically does this happen? So if I get paid in Bitcoin from my employer, what are you guys actually doing? Am I, as the employer, sending my payroll to you? You have some kind of centralized exchange that you guys have created. You buy Bitcoin and send it to my wallet. Is that how it's happening? So you guys are a centralized exchange?
Yeah. So we are non-custodial. We don't hold any employees' Bitcoin. Functionally how it works is, with my background in the industry, the process has been designed to reflect what an employer would be used to for a group RSP, as an example. And so part of that process involves, in a group RSP, before every contribution round, the individual amounts are reconfirmed. So if a company's doing, say, first and 15th with us, each time we are confirming and obviously because Bitcoin transactions are irreversible, we need to get them all right. We need 100% accuracy. So a big part of the process is the regular recurring confirmation of invoices. And from there, we just take a centrally pre-authorized withdrawal for the total amount from the employer, and then we send the staff their Bitcoin. And we're in the process of building out sort of a really interactive employee experience that will sort of resemble what you would have with a pension today if you were with a big insurance company. And so that's kind of where we're going over the next, maybe 6 or 12 months. And that's part of what Seb is doing for us, who is on your show.
Yeah. So, and that's a good segue. So Seb Bunny, who introduced us, talked, one thing that really struck me when we were doing the podcast was this idea that Bitcoin kind of encourages savings. And so the principle is because my dollars are worth less tomorrow than they are today, I'm quite motivated to spend, which drives consumerism, which fundamentally drives challenges around the environment as we use more and more stuff we don't really need. And of course, there's this narrative that Bitcoin's bad for the environment. And so, one interesting argument, I think, for both the environment and from a savings perspective is because I know my Bitcoin's be worth more next year than it will be today, I'm really incentivized to save. And a real life example I dealt with last week was my wife wanted a new road bike. So we bought a new road bike by selling Bitcoin, which was painful for me because I know that $2,000 I sold to buy that road bike is actually going to cost me, I don't know, probably $4,000 next year and $10,000 by the end of the decade. You know what I mean? So that's now a really expensive road bike and unnecessarily. But so it motivates me to hold on to my Bitcoin, whereas my dollars I kind of want to get rid of because things are just getting more expensive. So I need to do it now. And my question in that conversation from Seb leads me to ask, do employees think about this, or is this a type of message when you're talking about the education of employees? Is this the type of messaging you're communicating to them?
Yeah, absolutely. And the answer would be both. We get business partly because there are Bitcoiner employees that want to earn Bitcoin.
Yeah.
But those people would probably compose a small portion of a company's staff, and those people are kind of like champions inside the lunchroom.
Yeah.
But it's a big journey, and this is also why I think it's important. So getting back into my experience managing pensions, I've done tons and tons of pension education seminars. So you go into the plant on the lunch hour break, and you've got you get some time for each shift as they come off.
Oh wow.
Yeah. And so even with traditional investments, ordinary people aren't meant to be hedge fund managers.
Yeah.
Like they're just not. So if we can figure out a way to help people understand this is just a potentially very safe way to just save your money, that's a really exciting thing to be able to offer people. And I think the journey of financial literacy is complicated and intimidating for people. So it's great it's a really nice, and I know Seb feels the same way, for us to be able to offer the education around helping people understand why they would want to do this is really exciting.
I mean, you talk about educating people on their pensions. Like I've got a pension at the university that I teach at. I don't know anything about it at all. The only thing I know is I can't sell it because I was like, can I get rid of this? Because I wanted to buy Bitcoin. And they're like, no, you can't. So I'm like, okay, I don't really know. Now I feel like I should find out, is there a way for me to control how it's being invested? Because if there's a way to get it into some fund that has some relationship with a Bitcoin ETF, that's fairly motivating. But I think that, generally speaking, people have no idea about this type of stuff. And we're certainly not taught this in school. How does the lack of general financial literacy impact kind of that next layer of education that's required to understand Bitcoin? Because it's like, first you got to understand like money printing, which is complicated, and inflation. And then that kind of helps you understand why Bitcoin is important. That's a deep dive for people to get a hold of.
It's a systemic problem. And part of the issue is that most of the people who know a lot about investing in money are so invested in that system perpetuating forever that they are themselves not even great conduits of information around how this stuff works. So that's a challenge.
Yeah, and I think for me, it started like when I was in university and when YouTube came out and I started to watch YouTube videos about the money system in like 2006. That was the first time I'd heard about libertarian economics and these ideas around the Austrian school of economics and thinking, okay, like government intervention might be bad and money printing might be problematic and these types of things. It took years and years, a decade and a half for me to get to Bitcoin. And so, it's a long journey, right? But it does, once you start to seemingly understand the system we're in, the broken system we're in, it seems like the ultimate end to that path is to end up at Bitcoin at some point. It's just, is it going to take you 6 months through some kind of accelerated path, or is it going to take you, unfortunately, maybe 20 years to get there, which is an expensive time frame for people to deal with, right? Mm-hmm. So I want to ask, what's the message you'd like to leave with us here? You're passionate about Bitcoin. You're passionate about making sure that employees have the opportunity to earn in Bitcoin. What's kind of like the long-lasting message that you're fighting for?
I think it's just to be, we're just trying to help people understand that we're out there. Mm. And it doesn't, oftentimes when companies are wading into making decisions like this, they want somebody who they can actually talk to, a real person.
Right.
And so I think that's part of what's different about Block Rewards than other services that have done this longer than we have, is we will actually be involved in the process of helping you understand why you want to do this, rather than just show you how the system works and like what's required for you to participate. So if there's anyone who's listening and they just want to have a conversation about this, I'm very available. Mm-hmm. And that would be the message. Like, I love talking about Bitcoin. I've been dealing with business owners my entire career. And this, I think, is the most important thing a business owner should be considering right now.
Yeah, I love that. Scott, I really appreciate you coming in today. Check out Block Rewards and see if there's any opportunities for your employer or you as an entrepreneur to support your employees by allowing them to earn in Bitcoin. Thanks, Scott.
Thank you.